And I came across some people that were connected to this psychedelic underground, and they started talking to me about therapies that existed, mostly for post-traumatic stress disorder, which I eventually was diagnosed with in a kind of acute and chronic form of it. What happens when you have a sustained and prolonged period of abuse over a very number of years. Unlike what we see our veterans going through right now, where they go through very short periods of intense high stress, violence, and action, and then they come out of it in this very highly acute form of it. But it doesn't have the type of like long-term behavioral modification aspects that you do when you are a long-time victim of abuse, right? And so I didn't understand that this was what was keeping me from forming bonds with other people in life, and it was keeping me from having intimate relationships, and it was keeping me from healing any of this stuff because I was this closed-down, defensive, very angry young man. And I was able to stumble across work being done with both MDMA and LSD on treating post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's kind of a funny story, but basically I come from being this buzz-cutted, radical activist type. And then in about 2 weeks, I have this reintroduction after a kind of a 15-year period to all of these psychedelics out there. And I came out kind of like John the Baptist, like wanting to baptize everybody into like the brotherhood of eternal love. And I was going around telling everybody, oh, have you heard of this stuff? And they're all very bored because they've heard about it for the last 10, 15 years. But here I am trying to convince everybody to go along with me. And I end up having to go back to Chicago with this wholly new consciousness, this whole awareness of a different way of looking at the world. I was starting to open up on an emotional level. I was starting to reconnect with myself and starting to see that there was actually love and beauty in the world and all of these things that, somehow these medicines tend to create this type of awareness. And I had to go back and deal with the police in Chicago in this lingering case. And the long and short of it is I managed to win in court and then started the process of trying to put a civil rights case on the police, and they decided that they weren't going to let that happen. And so within a matter of 3 weeks after I won this court case, I was surveyed, I was followed, and eventually I was busted. And it's nobody's fault but my own that I was busted. Although I had given the police motivation to want to get me, I gave them all the reason to bust me because I was carrying drugs around. Because again, I thought I was John the Baptist and I was going to give this to everybody around me. So in the middle of this healing journey of 10 years, smack dab in the middle in 2005, I'm sent to prison. And this is the first time I've actually gone to prison. This is my third felony charge, and it's politically motivated. And so what ended up happening was I couldn't get out of this. It didn't matter that I put my life back together. It didn't matter I wasn't engaged in criminal activity anymore. It didn't matter that I wasn't even a drug addict anymore. I had to go. And I went to prison, and I went through the prison experience. And when I came out of it, I went in with a kind of a radicalized sense. I had all of these activists and these people I was working with, and they said, Charles, you have such an opportunity. You can write about this. You can organize the prisoners. You can start a revolt. And I believed it. And I went into this system that I knew very little about. I just knew anecdotal information, but I didn't really understand what was going on inside the system. And I ran smack dab into institutionalized racism, institutionalized brutality, and a system where the men did not want to be organized. Their biggest enemy was the guy from the other gang that was out on the yard. They didn't understand the system of oppression that they lived under. And here I was coming in with my marks and my this, and I'm trying to explain to them about the oppressed underclass and the surplus population, and they just didn't want to hear it. They didn't care about it. And I went through this terrible period of disillusionment. I became a target for white supremacists because I tended to gravitate towards the black guys and not the white guys in prison. You have to understand, the American prison system is stacked almost to unbelievable proportions with African Americans. I mean, it's about 3/4 of the population, yet they only make up 11 to 12% of the total population. So the disproportionality of African Americans in the American system is I mean, it's a human rights abuse on a scale that we really haven't understood. It is a new Jim Crow. It is a new de facto segregation. And so I go into the system, and these are the people that I connect with. These are the people that I hung out with on the streets, I bought my drugs from, like they taught me about street life. I understood them. Most of them, though, kids, low-level offenders, selling a couple bags on the street, trying to make some money because there's no other economic opportunities for them anyway. Conversely, the white offenders in prison tend to be these habitual offenders that get 9, 10, 12 convictions in their life. And they don't understand anything but the system of criminality. And so I did not identify with them, and the prisons, particularly in Illinois, and most of the American prisons are segregated by race. So you got the black guys here, the Latinos here, the white guys over here, and then the random Asian dude in the corner, right? And so here I am, ostracized. Eventually, I had to go into protective custody. I got, jumped by about 7 guys. I went through this whole terrible disillusionment experience where I felt like I was a man without a country, a man without people. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I had this I was writing all of this stuff. I didn't know anybody was going to ever see it again. And I got out of prison, and I had a very difficult time reintegrating all of my friends and the people that I understood, that were in my social circle. They were afraid of me. They felt like I was either being watched by the police, that I was going to draw heat to them. The people in the activist community that I was hanging out with thought I had lost my mind because I had gone into this psychedelic healing experience, and so I was no longer angry at George Bush, I didn't want to scream at the establishment, I wanted to hug everybody. And so that was crazy to them, because, I got lost in that drug thing. And so, it was a very isolating and lonely experience. And within 4 months, I was suicidal. I was really ready to end it. And there were a lot of other factors, of course, involved in this. But what it really boiled down to is that I had lost everything. And no one wanted to listen to me. And all of these grand ideas I had about putting my life back together and, becoming a voice for this type of work, it was all going up in smoke. And then I was introduced to the South American traditional medicine known as ayahuasca. And I was able to have a completely life-changing experience through this. It literally delivered me from the depression and the sense of alienation, and gave me a kind of a re-kickstart in life and let me get started again. And I spent the next 4 years rebuilding my life. I have a kind of a treat. At the end of the clips I'm going to show you some never-before-seen footage of me a week or two before I went to prison, when there was a young man who wanted to film my whole experience and create a documentary about my life and about my prison experience. And so I've got a little clip of just what I looked like and sounded like back in those days, right before that happened. So I'll share that with you. But the last 4 years, the back half of this healing experience, I called the first half my political awakening. That's when I really looked at the realities of living in the American system and what it really means and what it really stands for, and who's really calling the shots and who's really running the show. And when I went through that complete awakening process and had that disillusionment, I had to find something more to replace it. And what I found was a spiritual sense, a spiritual life. And I spent many years trying to build that, to find strength and meaning and purpose. And it's a very kind of loosely held spiritual practice. I don't belong to any religion or dogma. I don't really follow any practices, but what I really do is create relationships and community with people. And in those relationships and in that community, we all help each other grow. We all help each other heal. And there's a lot of wounded people that ended up in the community that I now belong to. It's, we all kind of look like this, and it's all very funny. But what was driven, it was driven by a lot of wounding and alienation and being outside of the dominant system. And so it was not for a number of years that I came back to this work. I started working on Exile Nation, and I found that the publishing industry wasn't interested in this story as it was. They were interested in a story that fit the few cultural means that they understood. And so for a white middle-class guy like me, well, this was the fish out of water story. Tell us about what it was like to be a fish out of water. but don't go into the politics. You know, people, I would hear things like people, they like prison stories, they don't like prison politics. And you know, they weren't curious about what was going on a sociological level. What they wanted to know was, did I ever drop the soap? And what were the consequences of dropping an aforementioned bar of soap? And every single person I met in the publishing industry asked me, did you get raped? In the shower?